Welcome, friends, to Halftime. I'm your host, Doug Piper, and I'm Halftime Carolina's Alumni Director. But more importantly, I hope you'll join me in this webinar series as we explore our halftime journeys together. Each webinar is designed to help you on your halftime journey through the actual stories of other alumni sharing their experiences. Today, we're joined by Barb Foulkrod. Barb is the Vice President of Hope Reigns, a nonprofit based in North Carolina. So please join me in welcoming Barb to our program. So Barb, how are you this morning? And would you briefly introduce what we're going to learn about in halftime today?
Good morning, Doug, and good morning, everybody out there. I am so thrilled that you chose to jump on this webinar this morning and that we can visit together for a little while. So I basically was just a regular mom. I've worked I was a teacher. I was a flight attendant for a little while. I was a professional volunteer raising my kids in North Raleigh. And my husband, and supporting my husband who owned a business. And my husband came home one day and said, I met this great guy, and his name is Lloyd Reeb. And he started telling me about Halftime Ministries. At the same time, we were very involved with a nonprofit that was coming alongside of couples. It was called Triangle Leadership Forum, and it was a delightful 10 years of our life. And Lloyd came and did the very first weekend along with his beautiful wife, Linda, to kick off the 2-year journey for these couples. And I was captivated immediately. I'll have to tell you, Doug, he just really grabbed a hold of my heart, talking about a life that's successful turning into a life of real significance. And I saw how it applied to my husband immediately. And I was delighted that Lloyd had agreed to start coaching Alan and meeting with him. But I didn't know at that time exactly how it would impact me and my life.
Well, you're right. Lloyd and Linda are phenomenal people, and they really are changing lives. And it's great to see that. And you and I are here as a result of some of their efforts and Bob Buford. We're going to move into the main part of our program momentarily, but there are a few items I'd like to go through before we move into Barb's story. Speaking of Lloyd Reeb, our next webinar will be with Lloyd Reeb, and Lloyd is going to be discussing launching your adult children. That'll be Thursday, October 10th at 9:30 a.m. I will put a link to the sign up there right in the chat, so you can click on that later if you would like and sign up for the webinar. It again is free, just like this one is. We do have a Halftime Facebook online group. You can search for it by just searching Facebook groups for Halftime Institute. Maybe one of the most important things that we have is the Ask a Question field. And the Ask a Question field is right down there at the bottom center of the screen. There, you can ask a question, which Barb will answer later on in the program at the end. We also have a poll, and it would be great to get your input on the poll. And this is basically where you are in your halftime journey. And the answers are real quick and easy. And Barb, just to give you an idea where we're starting from so far, in the question, the majority have completed a halftime program or are currently in a halftime program. So it looks like a large part of our audience right now, is familiar with halftime and the program, and probably Lloyd and Linda. We have a chat screen, and we would love for you to share where you're viewing the webinar from. Don't put questions there per se. Put that in the Ask a Question field, but share where you're from, where you are in your journey, maybe your latest book that's inspired you. We'd love to see lots of activity there in the chat, because this is the community that these webinars are intended to foster. If your webinar is not playing correctly, refreshing your browser window will correct most issues. If you can't hear, just double check that you've unmuted or turned your speakers up. We all tend to turn off a lot of video that interrupts us, but I think this one is well worth listening to. Lastly, if we have a technical issue and have to restart the webinar, we'll send you an email and send you that link. And everyone that has registered will get an email with a link to this recording. It'll be available immediately following the webinar. You can click on it. You can share that with others, because I know Barb's story is going to really touch some hearts. Any resources that Barb shares and the Facebook groups will also include in that follow-up email. So now let's move into our conversation with Barbara Foulkrod. Barb transitioned into halftime when her husband Alan was selling his business and their children were preparing for college. Together, she and Alan progressed through their halftime journey simultaneously and discovered together the next season God was leading them into. Today, Barb is vice president of Hope Reigns, a North Carolina nonprofit, and she's bringing hope and healing to kids in crisis through their experiences with rescued horses. Barb, welcome to Halftime. And let's see if I can successfully bring you up on screen there. There we go. The screen's looking better already. Welcome, Barb, to Halftime Online. How are you?
I'm doing great, Doug. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. And we've been waiting a while to do this, so I think this is really exciting. But you and Alan and I met at a halftime luncheon, I guess maybe 18 months ago. And did I understand that Alan wasn't really crazy about horses when you went down this path?
Yeah, he really wasn't. We initially got involved with horses. I can blame my daughter for this. She was one of those horse crazy girls, and she wanted a horse more than she wanted anything at all. And I'd grown up with horses as well, but it was kind of a dormant dream of when I was a young girl. And so the Lord really used my daughter to get us back into the horse world and to start just opening doors of possibility through that. So it was really cool. But yeah, he doesn't like horses, by the way. But somebody told him, this is hilarious. Somebody told Alan early on, it's either horses or boys. So he bought her a horse immediately. That's how it started.
Okay. That's the way to do it. Well, that's super. Well, Barb, I've heard so much about the lives you're changing through these horses. Did you ever dream that children and horses would be part of your life?
And I always have had a real passion since I came to the Lord in my 20s for just the redemptive power of the Lord. And I've been drawn to justice ministry and redemptive ministry from really the very beginning. So it is surprising how the Lord uses all things, right, to showcase his glory. And and the way I got involved at Hope Reigns was a lady who I became friends with at church gave a book to me called Hope Rising. And it's a book chronicling a journey of a couple out in Oregon. And really, they were involved with horses and rescuing horses. And what happened was kids who are experiencing a lot of crisis were drawn to their ranch to develop a relationship with this horse who was healing and to come alongside of this healing process. And this lady out in Oregon, her name is Kim Meter, just was started writing about this hope and this healing that was happening as people and animals start healing together. And I'm sure a lot of people can really relate to that who are animal lovers. It doesn't have to be a horse. It can be a dog or any kind of rescue animal. But there's incredible power in the journey of hope together.
Well, you've had an interesting story, but the part I haven't heard as much about was what got you and Alan interested in making such a major transition in your lives and seeking out, expertise or coaching things like Lloyd and Linda and Halftime?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I had mentioned prior, I think it was before we went live today and we were chatting about this, that Alan, we met Lloyd and Linda through a ministry that we were involved with here in Raleigh, North Carolina, called Triangle Leadership Forum. They did our opening weekend retreat every 2 years. And through that, Alan became good friends with Lloyd, and Lloyd became Alan's coach. And Alan entered halftime, sold his business, and it was just a real beautiful opportunity for Alan. And I celebrated that, but I just didn't know what my part exactly was in that until we were invited to go to a marriage conference via halftime in Orlando. And I'll tell you, Doug, the Lord really, really captured my heart down uh, in Orlando with Lloyd and Linda presenting at that marriage retreat.
So what aspect was it that really pricked your heart?
Mm. Well, it was interesting. Lloyd mentioned something to Alan right before we went down there that the most, and it threw me off a little bit when Lloyd said this, but Alan came home and said, Lloyd told me that the most important thing I can do in my second half is not build up something for myself or our family again, but it's to really, in the next 5 years, help you figure out as you transition from stay-at-home mom to what God has for you, but to really help use my gifts to help you figure out your second half. And I didn't really know what to think about that, but it's exactly that big idea that propelled the Lord to really get a hold of me at this marriage retreat, where I was able to meet and walk alongside that whole weekend other couples struggling in the exact same place that we were, asking a lot of the same questions, going from what does it look like to have a life that's truly significant? And the cool thing about that is my very favorite Bible verse from Ephesians 2:10 says, "For you are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do the good works that He prepared for you in advance." And the Lord just started reminding me a lot of things, and then bringing Alan alongside of me with all of his gifts and talents, and the freedom and the platform that Lloyd and Linda really set for us that weekend, to not have the answers, but to join the process of discovering what the answers are and what were those good works that the Lord had for me, and had laid out. It wasn't just for Alan; it was for me too. So it was really the beginning of the journey for me.
Well, that discovery process can be a lot of fun. It can also be very intimidating because there's a lot of dead ends that at least some of us, and I'm speaking of myself, that you hit these dead ends. Was there an aha moment for you that all of a sudden you realized, this is it? This is what I've been seeking?
Yeah, well, it started out with our coaching calls and them really holding my feet to the fire to do my mapping exercises and my mission statement, and really having, I think for me, what I was to do was right in front of me, but I had to do it strategically, and I had to really believe that the Lord was calling me to this good work. Does that make sense? I was already involved with Hope Reigns. I had already come alongside of my friend Kim. We'd started the ministry back in 2010. And this was quite a few years after that. It was the launching point when Hope Reigns bought their own property, and I was able to really step up into a strategic position. I think, and to believe in my own gifts, that God had brought me there for a purpose. And laid out these good works for me to walk in, not for, certainly never for my glory, but for the glory of Him, and for the hope and the healing for these kids and families that we have the privilege to serve.
So Alan sold his business, and you launched the kids, and you've been kind of going through this process and really settled in on Hope Reigns. So, but I mean, we're always questioning ourselves as to, yeah, but is this the one? Was there any aspect, was anything that happened that solidified it in your mind or your heart that Hope Reigns was indeed the passion God had laid out for you?
Yeah, I love horses, but I really love kids. So for me, um, I think that was the real draw. If I had to think back, and especially just thinking through, talking with everybody today, it's so great, right? Because we get to revisit where we've been and see how faithful God has been throughout our journey. It's hard to remember that when we're still journeying, right? When we're still in it. Um, but can you repeat your question one more time, Doug?
Well, I was just asking, I'm sorry if it was confusing. Um, as we find a passion,
Right.
if a lot of us still question, is this the one? Because we have good days and we have bad days.
Yeah,
Was
absolutely.
there any one moment or thing that happened, or it just sort of resonated with you, or a group of things that said, wow, this isn't just a good thing, this is a
Yeah.
great thing?
Yeah, for me, I don't think it was necessarily one moment. I think it was just following the next breadcrumb, following the next yes on my journey with halftime. And for me, honestly, it was believing that God really did have a plan for just me and not for my family as a whole or my husband and his business, but believing that I had my own gifts and talents. So I think the beginning of the journey was when Alan and Lloyd really started asking and turning the tables on me and saying, well, what are you going to do? And how can we help you instead of me helping him? If that makes sense. That was the large aha for me. And then the rest of it was just every day getting up and doing the next thing. And this whole redemptive journey has been a theme in my life. So it's the God using horses in this particular instance, mentors, and just our property, the ranch itself, to impact the kingdom of God. That's really, I think, my biggest aha when I knew, yeah, absolutely, I'm all in on this one. And for right now, it's Hope Reigns. But
Well, and I think that's interesting because Alan had his own business,
mm,
and you were keeping everything else going while he ran a business that was multi-country, right?
yeah, absolutely, he was pretty busy. I was holding down the home front.
So so all of a sudden he's looking at this major transition, and then Alan and Lloyd look to you and say, but what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I know it was kind of incredible. And we had some very funny conversations about this too, because in the beginning, I have a heart to mentor women. I love women, and I love meeting women and joining them on their journey, and just having a relationship. So at first, this was one of the low cost probes. I'm sure all of you have heard Lloyd talk about low cost probes. But one of their low cost probes for me was they wanted to build me this toolbox. That this was their idea. And I was like, guys, okay, I'm a girl. A tool, like I don't even know what's in a toolbox, right? So they're like, okay, let's rename this, let's repurpose this. So anyway, we had a lot of fun along the journey, and we certainly didn't go in a straight path the whole way. But I think at the end of the day, what they were trying to really communicate to me was there are things that I was already doing and gifts that God had already given to me that just needed to be utilized and believed in. And I bet there's people today that can really relate to that. Maybe thinking that their big purpose from the Lord is to be behind somebody else. And while that can be true, there's still so much power in knowing what God has for you to do. Does that make sense?
It does. But I'd like to know how that made you feel when the focus shifted, when Alan is selling his business, and I'm sure he's thinking about what does he do, because he's been busy probably 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And all of a sudden he's trying to figure out what he's going to do with his hours. But instead he looks at you
Yeah.
in a supporting role, right? Did I understand that that's one of the things that Lloyd was talking about? That, what do you want to do now? How did that
Yeah.
make you feel?
Absolutely. Well, it was a lot of energy focused on me with Lloyd and Alan, both helping. But in the beginning, I think I really was uncomfortable, to be really honest. Uh, I didn't, I didn't want all that attention. I was more comfortable focusing on what Alan had for his halftime journey. And so the coaching calls, Alan was really, uh, he kept inviting me, right? Okay, we've got a coaching call tomorrow with Lloyd again. I was like, well, I don't know. Why don't you take this one? And he just wouldn't take no for an answer. And I'm so grateful he didn't, because it's been his belief in me and his time and focus, especially his gift of strategy. That's something that I've really come to depend on. He's been gifted with a super strategic mind. And when that strategy turned on me and helped me figure out what was next for my journey, after I got used to it, I've really embraced it and come to lean on it.
So you were not involved in his business that he left, is that right?
Not in a formal sense, but anytime I think you own a business, there's definitely things that
But
you're
but
involved
you
with. But I
did
didn't
you
work. No.
yeah, you didn't show up at the office, but all of a sudden now you're going side by side on this journey. Is that on this second part of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. We sure are. And he's got his own ventures as well. He's actually working again back in his another company, so he's quite busy. But he loves to come out to the ranch, I'll tell you. And the Lord has so gotten a hold of his heart. He's not a horse fan, but oh my gosh, both of our hearts just are so for just the redemptive power of Christ, and to watch the Lord show off and bring his hope and healing into the darkest places. I mean, if there's anything that Alan and I love to be a part of together, it's that. Just being a small part of God's redemptive story.
Well, obviously your ministry is impacting kids and horses, but and Alan has gone through a lot as you, but how has this impacted your friends and maybe more importantly your family?
Wow. Well, um, that's a really interesting question. We have a great community out at Hope Reigns. So we have a staff of 12, 13 right now, but we have a volunteer base of over 200 people. So 200 people basically run our ranch, our 33 acres. And so for me, that's so become my community. These people aren't just coworkers, they're precious friends, and we're co-laboring for the kingdom together. And our volunteers, again, they've become like family to us. And just to be able to go out to the ranch and love on these kids and really make a space for God to show up and to showcase his healing power together. I think that, yeah, that's been the actually biggest surprise to me, has been the community and the family and the extended family experience that we've got to really have via Hope Reigns.
Well, this has, been I'm sure a huge transition on you and Alan, but obviously, I mean, I can see the smile on your face. I mean, the joy that you have, and I met Alan. I know that he feels similarly. What has that taught you about yourself and this whole experience and trusting God and moving forward in a significant transition like this? Because there are others that have not done this, or maybe are on the webinar today that are considering going down this path. Could you share what has maybe taught you about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really taught me uh, the intricacies of the Father, how there's no such thing as a second class follower of Jesus, or somebody that has uh, that maybe doesn't have a real mission to be on with the Lord. God has a plan for each and every one of us, and it changes, it evolves over our life. Um, I had a season that I was a mom, and I absolutely loved it. And when my kids launched, I was so fortunate to be able to enter another season, still missional, still doing the work that he created me to do. And the really cool thing is that he doesn't waste anything in our lives. So it could be, if maybe you're listening today and you think, man, I don't even know what I was really created to do. God's preparing you. And like Lloyd and Alan named my toolbox, we named it a treasure box after that, because I thought that was a little bit more palatable for me. But he was putting things in my treasure box when I was a mom, even from when Alan was being coached by Lloyd. I was receiving tools, and I was getting prepared for the work that he had for me next. Does that make sense? So there's nothing wasted, I think, in the kingdom of God has been a really great lesson for me. And then the second lesson that I see every single day, and I'm just in love with this idea of redemption. I'm in love with this idea that there's nothing outside of God's power to redeem and to use for his kingdom and to bring hope. So wherever anybody is today, we don't stay stagnant. We're growing and we're evolving in our journey with the Lord and with each other. And if you're in halftime, God uses halftime to reveal so much of this to us, such wonderful tools and opportunities to be in community together and to wrestle together. So I think this grand idea of God preparing us, and then this journey that we're on. And is there somebody from Kenya that just joined us?
There
Hello,
is.
Lynn. That's exciting.
I see Kenya, Singapore, Raleigh.
Oh, that's my daughter. Hi, Hannah.
Oh, pressure's on now.
I know, seriously. Now I got to behave.
Well, Barb, one of the things now, I have to admit, I've been around for a while and I haven't heard toolbox. I do like your word better. I wonder, how would you characterize? Clearly, tool is not a real girl thing.
Right.
There's an awful lot of guys that could relate to it. But treasure, I think, is a really interesting word for it. Can you describe what was in your treasure box?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love to give gifts to people, and um, to write notes and whatnot. So it's funny because Lloyd and Alan are both super efficient, and efficiency is not normally what I have strived for, but I've learned to be a lot more efficient. And so what they were trying to do was to make me more efficient in the way that I give gifts. So it was more of like a gift box per se, a box of encouragements, things that I would normally, like devotionals, or really pretty scriptures and calligraphy, or notes, all kinds of things that I would normally give out. They just encouraged me to, well, plan ahead on that and think ahead. You don't have to do everything as a one-off. So they were encouraging me to build this box of treasure so that I would be ready for a blessing when it crossed my path. That was one of the low-cost probes, and I'm glad you like treasure box better than toolbox too.
Well, I do. The connotation is shows much more value. we guard our treasure, our tools, while they're important to us, guys. I don't think we'll die on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I love that, and this has just been awesome. It is the top of the hour, Barb, and we've always tried to keep the main part of the program to about 30 minutes, as you know. Before we transition to the Q&A, maybe there's a point or two you'd like to make as we wrap up that, in this journey, you've experienced a lot of excitement. I'm sure you've seen some things you were discouraged about. The doors didn't open that you wanted. But now that you're well into it, how do you feel? Or how do you look back on it and as to where you are now?
Yeah, great question. I'm confident that Alan and I would not be journeying where we are without halftime. And I think one of the biggest gifts that we've been given via halftime is the ability to go through this together. We had a couple off ramps along the way where one of us could have peeled off and done our own thing. Um, but we were really encouraged by Lloyd and his coaching to stay in the game and to keep asking the hard questions of each other and to keep figuring out how we can use our own gifts and talents to encourage each other on this journey. And you know what the really funny thing is Alan and I, our journey isn't exactly parallel. Like at our marriage retreat that we went to in Orlando, some of the couples, they were doing the exact same thing. So they were working day in and day out on the same idea, the same ministry. And Alan and I don't do that. But I think we found the ability to utilize each other's uniqueness and the way that God made each one of us to really breathe life and encouragement into the unique work that God has called each one of us to do.
Wow. Well, that is powerful, Barb. And I appreciate you sharing that. Is it okay if people want to get in contact with you? I think we've got a link right down there in a green box in the bottom center of the screen. And if you'll click on that link, that will put you in contact ultimately with Barb if you've got maybe some questions that you might not want to share openly in our webinar. So thank you, Barb. Do you have time to move into the questions and we'll start to go through those?
That would be great. That'd be great.
Cool.
And I'd love to hear from any of you guys. Any way I could be an encouragement in any way, I would be honored to do that.
Great. So for those of you that need to leave, we understand you've allocated 30 minutes. This is recorded. As soon as the webinar is over, the replay is available at the very same link that the live event is at. However, for those of you that have time to hear Barb answer the questions, or maybe you've got a question yourself, or maybe you want to ask a question and run, you can ask a question and actually Barb will answer it whether you're here live or not. And the cool thing is you'll actually get a unique email that comes to you that gives a unique link to where Barb answers your question specifically. So you don't even have to watch the whole webinar. So the Q&A is a great part, and I look forward to that. Now, before we move into that, Barb, let's review our poll and see where our audience is. That'll kind of help you maybe answer the questions. It looks like it's split 50-50, with about half the people are either currently or have completed a halftime program, and the other 50% have completed halftime programs, but they want to move beyond their experience to more fully engage. So a large part of our audience is already well into their journey, I think. And so a large percentage is very interested about, I think, to take it to the level that you have. So we will move into the questions. I'll read them to you, Barb. The first one, let's see. All right, so this first one is, you mentioned low-cost probes, but what were some of the first steps you took?
That's a great question. So I think the first step that I took was really going to this retreat and really believing that halftime had something for me more than just a supporting role for Alan in this journey. Not that that wasn't enough. I benefited immensely from Lloyd's work with Alan, for sure. And then it was kind of like following the breadcrumbs. Then the next opportunity was for me to join Alan and for us to go on this retreat together. So I think that was kind of the first risk, I guess, I took, is going to see and ask some questions about myself. And then that really started the journey of, now for me, I was already doing Hope Reigns. So I was already involved in Hope Reigns. It was just more about how I was involved and how I was stepping up. The low cost probe really, Lloyd and Alan had come up with some funny ideas. The one that I remember the most, I think, was the toolbox. So I'll have to think about if there was any other low cost probes that I did before that. But I think pretty quickly thereon, they both encouraged me to give Hope Reigns a serious look about how could I use and really utilize the way God made me, and dive in deeper at Hope Reigns.
So you didn't end up with any dead end, low cost probes, is I think what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I really didn't. I really didn't. Sometimes it's the obvious. What are you
Yep.
doing that's right in front of you?
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be go to the other side of the world, right? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. But in my case, it was right in front of me, and I needed to have the courage to recognize that.
Well, horses with attitudes a little bit unique.
Yeah, with pink tennis shoes.
All right, we will move on to our next question. And again, if you've got a question, please submit it at the Ask a Question link at the bottom. So this comes from Paul. Can you share a little more about the organization and any story that you can think about your time there? And I think what Paul is referring to is Hope Reigns.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I would love to. In fact, I'm going to share one of Lloyd's favorite stories. So I'm going to just to back up just for 1 minute. What we do out at Hope Reigns is we have a herd of 15 rescued horses. So these horses all have their own story of abuse, neglect, redemption. And they are living now on our 33-acre ranch. And 5 days a week, kids ages 5 to 18 who are in our program, we have 180 current clients right now. They are connected with one of our rescued horses and a trained mentor. And the first bridge that we build to these kids who have experienced extreme life crisis is the horse's story. And so I'd like to start there and share a story that happened to me. I do sessions every Thursday night out at the ranch. And I met this young lady. She was about 9 years old at the time, and her foster mom brought her out to Hope Reigns. They were in the process of adopting her. And this young girl had experienced a lot of trauma, like a lot of the kids that we have the privilege of serving. Her birth mom was not well, and she was an active drug addict. And in order for this mom to get her money for drugs, she trafficked her 5-year-old little girl. And when she wasn't using her for her drug money, she would frequently lock her in the trunk of her car. And what do you say to this little girl when she comes up your driveway? Well, I, like we often do, welcomed her and just told her how glad I was she had come to Hope Reigns. And I didn't talk to her about her story at all, but I said, hey, I have a new friend who I'd like for you to meet, and her name is Selah. And Selah was a champion bloodline. She got into the hands of a really bad owner, a hoarding situation for horses, which unfortunately happens more often than not. And Selah was locked in her own stall and had to get dug out of her own excrement when the authorities came to rescue her. And I was telling, and Selah's just this beautiful, beautiful horse and we were petting her and loving on her. And this little girl looked up to me and said, Miss Barb, nobody should ever get locked away. And I said, baby girl, you are so right. Nobody should ever get locked away. And we both had tears coming down our faces. And her foster mom said, that was the first time she had ever even alluded to something from her past that was negative. And so that little girl started building a bridge with that horse, and they started a foundation of trust and safety, which, as you can imagine, because I shared some of her story with you, that was very challenging for her to do. And then the bridge started getting built to her session leader, her trained mentor that she worked with every week. And I'll tell you, that little lady was out in sessions for a good couple of years, and she built some amazing skills using her horse and the safety that she found out at Hope Reigns. And she's transitioned back into a really healthy and productive life as a teenager.
But it was the horse that sort of, there was this relationship with the horse that drew her out.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? So often the kids that we have the privilege to serve have been hurt by people who look like you and I, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the horse is something safe because they either have never had an experience with a horse, or their story, similar to that little girl, their story really paralleled. So something inside of them came alive and said, wow, that horse understands what it feels like to be locked up and abused, not valued. And that spark is what God uses to start rewriting their story and redeeming it, right?
Yeah, I could only imagine what went through your mind after processing all this.
Oh man, I know. And if you can imagine, Doug, that happens every day out there. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's work you enjoy showing up for, isn't it?
It is every day. Yeah, I know. Most days I think, I am so blessed I get to do this, and I think I could have missed all of this if I didn't have the courage and the strategic initiative that Halftime really provided me with.
Wow. Paul, that was a great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move into, I think, what's going to be our last question. And I admire your emphasis on modeling our lives to be an example for our children and how to live out our second half. Are there any specific ways you've included your children or grandchildren in your second half?
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. For me, I've shared a couple of different times that this whole amazing story of redemption, and really just what that word means, is something that's always been a real passion of mine. And the opportunity to invite my kids in on that journey, I think has really colored them each in a different way. So specifically for my daughter Anna, she helped in the very beginning. She was 14 years old, and she helped really breathe life into Hope Reigns and to help start Hope Reigns, which was an amazing shaping for a 14-year-old. And she is a young woman who is serious about justice and change, and serious about the Lord, and is still in the work. So that's really great. My son, my oldest son, is really he loves people and language. And so this summer specifically, just as a recent example, he served as a translator for one of our families who we serve, who is a Spanish-speaking family. So he came alongside of them and allowed us to serve this precious family by using his gift of Spanish. And then my youngest son, we actually met. Boy, talk about a whole nother podcast, Doug. We were able to meet.
We can do that, Barb.
Yeah, via Hope Reigns and one of our community partners. But Precious Jordan, he's now 18 years old, a freshman in college. And I'm incredibly proud of him and the young man that he's becoming. But God has really had his hand of redemption on Jordan's life. And I've learned a lot through him.
So could you capsulize what you want your children to see? And I'm asking for a reason. I mean, I think it's a great insight that you have, that if our kids and grandchildren don't have I mean, what model do you want them to see? Do we want them to see what's on television and in Hollywood movies, or is there a better example? What do you think you're trying to show what do you hope your children see? Let me rephrase that.
Yeah. Boy, that's such a good question. I really, um, I hope that they have eyes to see what the Lord is doing and where He's working. And then I hope they have the courage to jump in and to be a part of that redemptive work, because that is where you can be as successful as you want to be. But the significance in life are the things that are eternal. You know, the significance is found not in the stuff we get to collect, but in the experiences and the relationships that we have the privilege to participate in. And for me, that's hope reigns. For my kids, they have a heart to see, I believe, where God is working, and I'm watching them figure out where's their launching point and where's their jumping in point. And I pray that for little Theo and my new grandson who's coming anytime now, that they will be able to follow the breadcrumbs in their own life, that they'll be able to see God working and know, just like Ephesians 2:10 says, that they were created to walk in good works that God set before them. And they are God's plan A to reach the world.
And that they have a treasure chest.
They do. They do. Their own treasure chest. I guess the boys would maybe want a toolbox. I don't know.
I don't know. They like treasure chests too. I mean, all the pirates. You can't have a good pirate movie without a treasure chest. So I think you're on to you top Lloyd with that one, and Alan.
That's right.
We have a couple more questions, Barb. Let's see. All right. What are you most looking forward to in the days ahead?
Oh my goodness. So that's multifaceted. I mean, obviously, I'm looking forward to becoming. Theo calls me Memes. Used to be Mimi, but he just shortened it to Memes. So I'm looking forward, probably most of all, to meeting grandson number 2. I'm just really looking forward to continuing the journey, Doug. I've at this age, the destination isn't quite as glamorous as it used to be when I was younger. Uh, God is really teaching me to enjoy the journey, and so the journey at Hope Reigns is going to be an exciting one. We're launching into our next 10. We've completed 10 years, and we've completed 10,000 free of charge sessions for kids in crisis. So right now I'm planning for the next 10 years. We're diving into our strategic plan. So I'm really excited about journeying there and seeing who God is going to bring into our community to help do this good work. And just I think the expansion of our family, and hopefully encouraging others to continue to see where God is working and to jump in.
Well, I'm going to have to sit. I have no excuse if you're just 2 hours away. I've got to come up there and check you guys out. This is awesome.
Love it.
You've had such great answers. We have one more question, I think. One of your comments that struck me was, I was following the next yes. Can you expand on that journey of surrender? So let me phrase that again, because I don't think I read it real clearly. One of your comments that struck me was, and this is quote, I was just following the next yes. Can you expand on that part of your journey of surrender?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of it is just how I'm made. You know, I'm for those of you who guys do the Enneagram, I'm a heart center, and so the heart center allows me to stay very present and very much in the moment. So for me, saying the next yes in the next moment is kind of just how I'm wired to do. So I think it was being cognizant of some of the strategy and planning long term, and then directing the next strategic yes could be a little bit maybe better way to say that. And I think, like I shared, for me, it wasn't to go halfway around the world to do something completely life-changing and amazing. For me, my next yes was saying yes to the thing that was right in front of me, to what I was already involved in, but it was stepping up and stepping into more of a leadership role, and learning to keep saying yes, not just to stay in that first yes that I said.
Well, Barb, you have a phenomenal story, and this has been a lot of fun sharing this part of your morning. At this point, I think we're ready to wrap up. If you had a closing comment, and I feel like I've already asked you way too many questions, but maybe you have something you want to share, and if not, we'll move on and wrap up.
Well, I just want to really encourage everybody. I wasn't able to share my full testimony today with you guys, but um, the Lord has really used a lot of pain in my life, and He's turned it into something, a platform for me. And I would just really like to encourage each one of you guys that there's nothing outside of God's power to use for His glory, and to use in each of your own story to redeem you and your family. So lean into your pain. I learn that every day from our kids out at Hope Reigns, is they have the courage to lean in, and to press in, and to know that God can and will use this for His glory. Wow.
Well, Barbara, again, appreciate your time so much. Thank you for sharing all these moments with us. And I'm going to go back through this because there's several pearls I want to write down. Well, we thank you for all your time today, and especially the audience. We thank you so much for spending so much time with us this morning. We just value your time. And we just want you to know there are more of these webinars coming. This next one will be launching your adult children, which seems to be a theme from our discussion today with Barb. That will be Thursday, October 10th at 9:30 a.m. And again, if you're interested in signing up for that, I will put the link there in the chat. Let's see if we can do that successfully. There we go. I think that went in there. And with that, just let everybody know that the webinar was recorded. A link will be sent to everyone that has registered for the webinar, and you can still register even though the webinar is over. And I'll also send out a link to our Facebook group. So with that, Barb and I say good morning or good day, depending on what side of the world you're on.
Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
Bye-bye.